Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mount Mindset. We've got Ross in from Beyond Baseline. He is going to cover off his little tale of how he ended up from nearly facing jail time to being on the stage, expressing all the things that we can do that are within our power to turn our lives around. So it doesn't matter where you're at your point in your life. You can be higher than high or lower than low. He's a prime example of you have got what it takes to turn it around. It is within you. So we are going to go over all the little twists and tales that took him on this adventure, what he learned, how he found out, and the 80 different subjects that are in psychology. We're going to go there and we're going to find out how the man came to be doing these great things that men need. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So for people that don't know you, like, how would you sum up to them, what's the old elevator pitch for you?
I mean, who I am, to understand why I am, you have to understand where I'm at and where I was,
Right.
I think. And I can give a succinct version of that. So, today I'll start with all the smart ass sounding stuff, the fanciful sounding stuff. So
give us a LinkedIn version.
We've had a chat on the phone, so you'll have heard some of this. But, for the last 9 years, speaker, trainer, consultant, specialising in all things wellbeing science and human optimization. So my background's in 4 forms of psychology: neuroscience, positive psychology, sleep psychology, and psychological disorders. I'm also well versed in all things blood work analysis, health screening, health testing. That's a bit of a fascination of mine. I'm a registered member of the British Psychological Society, the European Union of Sleep, and I still maintain my ties with Glasgow University's neuroscience and psychology department. I work with athletes and organisations, small and large. So you've got, your small growth orientated startups that have as little as 10 staff all the way up to maybe 1,000 plus staff. Then you've got your larger national and international organisations. So companies like the UFC, Lululemon, Cisco Systems, RBS, O2 Virgin Media, so on and so forth. And predominantly with them, we are rolling out behavioural change programs. Every organisation wants to achieve their goals. They've got KPIs. They want people to perform. And while I appreciate that, I have a business too now with staff. You've also got to remember that people are people. Like, the problem in life is not it's not the problems. It's the fact that we don't have the tools to deal with the inevitable challenges when they arise. And life's full of inevitable challenges, especially when you've got kids, especially when you've got caregiving responsibilities. Maybe you've got an elderly relative that's sick. Maybe you yourself get sick, so on and so forth. So we have to look at it from a human-centered perspective.
Well, it's that thing where generally when we're in work or business or an environment that we're looking to perform, whether it's a hobby or a sport or anything that you want, we always plan the targets around the ideals. Ideal scenario, ideal environment, ideal results. But what you need for that is you need to be in the perfect state all of the time to get those results. And human nature is you go in and out of various states throughout the day.
You just
and it changes, and it's like, you have this volatility. People think they are the one thing all of the time on a flat line, and they're not. They go through these peaks and troughs of, really motivated to can't be bothered. I don't know why I feel this way. I feel incredible, and they oscillate, and they wonder that people. That's the inevitable challenges of when you go and you face this scenario. How do you get the most out of people to get them in that state more of the time to get the results that you want?
That's the goal. It's we meet people. My company is called Beyond Baseline, and it's about meeting people where they're at, Geo. So psychologically and physiologically, we all exist. Me, you, everyone you love and lead exists on an emotional landscape, -10, +10, and on a physiological plane, -10, +10. And I guess my goal with Beyond Baseline is to give people the tools, the methodologies, the interventions to recognise where they sit, where they're positioned.
So for everybody that doesn't understand that, Beyond Baseline, I understand what you're describing there, but for people that maybe don't quite get what Beyond Baseline would be, you have a scoring system that can determine their baseline, so where they're currently operating. And it's got a scale, the 2 scales there that you mentioned.
It's modular.
So
physiologically, you're looking at, okay, how your biological fundamentals, right? So again, just to finish up that point, everyone exists somewhere on the emotional landscape, the physiological plane, +10, negative 10 plus 10, negative 10 plus 10. And those two scores, if you will, make up your health armor. And your scores determine your capacity for stress and hardship, your ability to bounce back from the inevitable challenges of life, and also how likely you are to realise your fullest potential, parentally, occupationally,
give
athletically.
us some context. Like, give us an example of somebody that would be, they display these characteristics, and
Yep.
this would really be in the scale. Like, give me you can use someone, you know, someone anonymous or yourself, or maybe just a hypothetical person, but to give a bit of context, what would something like that look like?
So most humans oscillate between a negative 3 and a plus 3. In order to be, I could give you looks and feels. So, for example, you start at 0, right? Let's say, or 0 is baseline. Psychologically, when you start to slide down the emotional landscape, you're going to a negative 3, a negative 5, a negative 7, a negative 9. Negative 9 is where your suicidal ideation, and obviously 10 would be, you know, taking your own life. A negative 5 might be where you're dealing with maybe not a diagnosed depression, but you have symptoms of depression, maybe fleeting or ephemeral or transient depression. That's where you're experiencing some of the hallmarks of depression, but for only a period of time. And sometimes the situation will correct itself naturally without intervention. Sometimes there has to be intervention. So the hallmarks of depression are, in short, the cognitive issues, thinking negatively about yourself, the world around you, the future. Then you've got the emotional, you know, the sadness, the misery, bleakness. Then you've got the motivational, can't be arsed with anything or anyone. And then you've got the somatic, weight gain or weight loss, depending on where you're at in the depressive cycle.
So you're essentially describing that you're using beyond, like, your company Beyond Baseline is using these metrics to triangulate or identify. So theoretically, someone could come to you and say, you know, I'm looking to find, I don't feel great, I'm looking to find out what's wrong with me. And you're using these metrics to get a baseline of where they're at and why they feel that way.
Exactly.
Or you could use it as a diagnostic tool where someone comes to you, maybe aren't open about the situation, and you're getting the metrics and you're going, do you feel like this? And you're starting to then probe, well, you know, thinking, well, there might be something to this because we found you on the scale. And that way it's actually opening their eyes to go, hey, look, you don't feel this way just because it came out of the blue. It's actually that these things are going on. Like your health, you need to increase some of your health markers. Maybe your fitness is dropped off. Maybe you've gained weight. So there's signs that you're actually triangulating. And by the way, there's not only is this not just in your mind, but there's also reasons that this has took place, and they're areas that you could go in and work with.
100%. If what we see across the board, right? So if this is quite common actually, but we see it in people who most certainly have depression and people who have low mood, which could be a large percentage of the population. We see, so I always start, if I'm looking to optimize someone, whether they're in a negative place and they want to get back to baseline, or they're at baseline or just beyond and they want to realize more of themselves mentally and physically. If you want to optimize someone's mood, you have to look under the hood, right? So, you know, you want to be doing a blood test ultimately. And I don't just mean the type of blood test a GP would do, because they look at specific segments. So they might just do a hormonal panel, or they might look at lipids or something like that. But I'm talking about a comprehensive analysis, looking at all these different biomarkers. Biomarkers, essentially, you probably know this, but biomarkers are little data points and little indications as to what your health status is like under the threshold of conscious awareness. So just data to dig into, knowledge for navigation. Do you have any biological red flags or don't you? So we look at that. But anyway, back to this common thread and this commonality, what we're seeing with people that have diagnosed issues with depression or low mood, and then probably maybe 30%, 30% of the population could be suffering from this right now, is three things. We see low vitamin D, high HbA1c, and high CRP. I'll break these down so everyone knows what vitamin D is.
Anyone in the northern hemisphere is deficient in vitamin D.
And you're looking at like insufficiency and deficiency, right? So that one most people know. Then you've got CRP, Charlie Romeo Papa, C-reactive protein, which is a biomarker that shows you how systemically inflamed your body is, a lot or a little. And systemic inflammation is correlated with all-cause mortality, with the exception of accidental death. And then you have HbA1c, hemoglobin A1c, essentially how sweet is your blood? Is it very sweet or is it in a more balanced state?
Sweet as in the glucose level.
Yeah. To give everyone an insight, every cell in the body has a cycle, a life cycle, meaning it becomes senescent and dies and another cell is reborn. So when it comes to red blood cells, this is a bit of the science, but if I draw your blood today and we isolate your red blood cell, we can tell how much sugar has glycated, i.e. stuck or bound to that red blood cell, because it has a 3-month life cycle. And so you'll be able to determine how much sugar, how much glucose is stuck or bound or glycated to that red blood cell. And so HbA1c gives you an indication of how sweet your blood has been over a 3-month cycle. And there's optimal ranges. So again, low vitamin D, high HbA1c, high blood sugar, and high inflammatory markers. That's a common pattern we see in people that have low mood or depression. And these are 3 simple things that are very easy to fix. They're very hackable.
What would you do with sweetened blood? Just, is it a dietary fix? Is it supplementation?
It could be as simple as diet. The thing is, you always want to understand context. So I very much don't like...
Because then it would come back to how much glycogen they're actually burning. So if they have high activity, yeah, I get it.
So for me,
one
probably
door opens
dietary,
another
right?
door.
I'll give you an insight, right? Genetically, a few years ago, I look like my father. I sound uncannily like him, unfortunately. Don't have much of a relationship with my dad, right? But when my father... This speaks to the value of a genetic test. So... And it's almost people talk about self-awareness. I'm big on self-awareness, but not just psychological self-awareness, biological self-awareness, both of your weaknesses and your strengths. So again, I look like my father, I sound like my father. And when my father was 30, I was 8, and he fell into a diabetic coma and almost died. Now, I'm a slim guy. I'm 155, 56 pounds, 5'9" on a good day. My father's a bit taller than me, but he's built like Snoop Dogg anyway.
Right.
So when he lost half his body weight, you can imagine visually how scary that looked. It was so scary that my mum was crying and she did not like my father.
Was it diabetes that was causing
Type
this?
2 diabetes, not type 1.
Not type 1,
so
you need insulin.
Lifestyle related. Yeah. Anyway, so my father recovered. He required insulin. Anyway, I tell you that because later on in life, I was curious. I had a lot of health concerns. I had autoimmune issues, so on and so forth. So that encouraged me to get into exploring blood work analysis and such. Anyway, I performed a genetic test and I found out that I was at in terms of genetic variants, I have particular genes that put me in the top 1% of risk for type 2 diabetes because my father has those genes too. Now, we have... imagine this fist here is your genes, my genes, right? So we have a set of genes, right? Every single one of us. And then we can either express those genes negatively based on how we choose to live our lives, the stress that we invite into our lives, we're pulling that trigger. Like my father was, because he had a real sweet tooth, he never exercised, he drank a lot. So he's expressing those negative genes. And
so people don't understand this. I mean, we're getting into the territory of epigenetics. So epigenetics is where there was a belief previously that your genetic code was written and that was it.
Yep.
You had
the mercy of your genes.
You had a genetic sort of sentence, if you like, and you couldn't adjust it. Epigenetics came to the fore to say that even though you have those genes in your body, it's how those genes are expressed by your actions, behaviours that will determine, or also your environment, which will determine that those genes can express differently. So
for me, the easiest way to explain epigenetics is: here's your genes. You're not fixed. They're not. You're not governed by your genes. Epi means above, so you're literally able to hover above and manipulate your genes. Granted, some people are born with things that are unfixable, but there's a lot of things that lay dormant within us that, if we live an unhealthy lifestyle, and some of us can get away with more things than others. You know, for example, maybe because of my genetic variability or my genetic variants, I can't eat as much fast-acting carbohydrates over a prolonged period of time as you could, you know, because maybe you don't have those gene variants, you know. So you ask the question, when you look at someone's biological fundamentals, you look at high blood sugar, what can we do to mitigate those issues? It's always dependent on the individual. You've got a lot of health influencers out there right now that go through an experience, and then because of that experience, it's been a positive experience, they say this thing worked for me, a diet or whatever, So therefore, universally, it should be applied to everything and everyone, meaning veganism worked for me or carnivore worked for me or whatever. So therefore, everyone should be that thing. And that's not very enlightened. I've been pescatarian, fruitarian, carnivore, raw food. I've done all those diets, and I know this. There's a lot that can be argued with nutrition, but there's two indisputable facts. One, Western diet causes disease. Standard adult diet, a sad diet. The four horsemen, if you will, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer's. Western diet causes disease, and indisputable fact number two, any culture that's preserved its traditional nutritional approach is free from Western disease. So there's a lot that can be argued.
Western disease, such as the four that you've mentioned there.
Yeah. So Alzheimer's or type 3 diabetes, as that's now called, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes type 2.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. And so you think about it, I've
got a friend that had he needed open heart surgery, had some sort of cardiovascular problem. It was AFib, then it led to sort of degeneration of his heart.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to sort of the surgeon. The surgeon took his markers, took the blood. Surgeon basically says, you've got two choices. We can crack open your chest, and we can fit either a pig's valve in your heart, and then you'll be on these sort of autoimmune drugs for life, because your body will try and reject the pig's valve. So essentially we need to suppress your immune system. The other one we can do is we can fit a titanium valve, but it needs to be replaced every 10 years. So every 10 years we need to crack your chest open. Well, he didn't like the idea of that, and sought out what is his alternatives. And one of the alternatives that he went to see a sort of practitioner in Florida, and they basically said, we're cutting everything out your diet, had to remove any teeth that were rotten. So he was walking about with a tooth that was missing. He looked like being in a fight. It was like, what's happened to you? Then they put him on a fast. So he was in a sort of water only, like bone broth fast for 42 days. And he would be saying, I'm going for my lunch, but what are you having? A warm bowl of water. What do you mean?
It's interesting you're talking about fasting, because I'm a big proponent of fasting. I always joke and say it's fascinating, but fasting for me, I've never shared this in a podcast, right? I had terrible issues with autoimmune. I had terrible autoimmune issues. I mean, to the point where I was borderline, I'd rather just end it than continue with this stuff. So I was being tested by the doctors for arthritis, erythromyalgia, fibromyalgia, all these different algias. And other such things as well, Raynaud's and all these different things. And I was having joint pain, a lot of joint pain, nerve pain. I've got pictures where my right hand would blimp out. It'd be red, like bright red, almost like, like sunburn, like a line of sunburn. Big inflamed hand. My knee would be, blimping out. My feet, I'd have these big welts in my toes. I kept it in for so long. And I remember one weekend I was Faye's my other half, together 13 years. We were going to Skye. We're going to Skye, and I was driving, and I had a lot of joint pain. By this point, I'd been carrying it about for
When you say you were holding it in, do you mean you weren't telling anyone?
I wasn't telling anyone.
Right. How long had you held it in?
About a year and a half. I was very confused by it all, and I didn't know what was going on, right? And I hadn't made the connection between diet fully yet. So, and this, I'll get to my point about fasting, but we were on our way to Skye. I'd held it in for so long. I'd been holding all this physical pain in. It started to take a toll on my mind. I'd slid down the emotional landscape, if you will. And I'm in the car, driving our wee Fiesta, on our way to Skye. And she's all happy and she's looking at the scenery and whatnot. And I'm just because of the pain and then the burden of carrying that pain around, a tear just dropping down the side of my eye because I can't press anymore on the accelerator. She's like, turns around, and obviously she experiences a shift. What's up? And then I just let out an almighty cry and just broke down and pulled over on the side of the road, explained it, and then started this process for about a year, trying to figure out what was going on. GPs were shit. I'm not going to lie. I don't think they're all crap, but GP, general practitioner, not specialised practitioner.
They're in a system that's explicitly flawed. I mean,
exactly.
They can be the great, most well-intended people in the world, and a lot of them are lovely.
And a lot of them now are going out on their own because they're controlled and they're limited. But I went into the GP and I just said, look, I want by this point, I'd been going to the GP for a long time. And it takes a while to get appointments with rheumatology and so on.
Yeah.
So I went in and I demanded, you can actually do this, anyone can do this. I demanded every single year from birth to that very date, all of my health files. So I got stuck into reading all my health files, and I was asking loads of questions and finding things out about myself, about my childhood that I didn't know. Anyway, it got so bad, right, that the only time I felt good was when I wasn't eating. And then I thought to myself, I'm going to try a week-long water fast.
How did you know that? How
Because
did you know you weren't eating?
I was fasting naturally. It just started, my body maybe have intuitively said, stop eating, because any time I was eating, I was having these issues.
Did you see this in your medical files?
It wasn't as conscious. What's that?
Did you see this in your medical files, or did you just
I was just
remember it?
looking back, and I was seeing that I've always had issues with eczema when I was younger, and I was
Right.
always taking baths in oilatum and steroid creams and so different things. And I thought there's something here. And I started to, while I was studying psychology, I was also, you know, even though I specialised in those 4 areas I mentioned earlier on, neuroscience, sleep psychology, in psychology, there's 80 forms of psychology. There's health psychology, there's evolutionary psychology, there's atypical, developmental, there's loads of other things you get to explore. And I was taking extracurricular classes. I was training to be a PT. I was consuming every book under the sun and staying up all night reading things. I was just immersing myself in all things human flourishing. Anyway, I decided I was going to do a week-long water fast. I just wanted to be done with the symptoms. And not only did the
How
symptoms...
How did you come to the point of going, right, I'm consuming psychology?
Of psychology?
Psychology to going, I'm going to do a water fast.
Right. Let me finish the point on this and we'll come back to the psychology piece. So I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I decided that I'm going to do this week-long water fast. What have I got to lose? Because I tried all these supplements and different therapies and all these different things, going to rheumatology, blood work here, there and everywhere, and it wasn't working. And you think it's your mind then, don't you? You think it's in your mind, and the doctors start to suggest it's in your mind. Anyway, I do this week-long water fast, and I didn't just feel, I wasn't asymptomatic. I felt euphoric. We could probably do an hour on water fasting, and that then opened up a real interest in fasting and the power of fasting and how it can be healing to the body. Now, strong caveat, not anyone can fast. You know, they say ultimately you have to do it supervised. I've done it supervised. You want to get your electrolytes checked. You want to do your blood work during it. Anybody who isn't on medication can fast probably healthily for 24 to 72 hours. But if you are over 40 and on medication, you probably shouldn't. You should probably do it medically supervised. Anyway, that's when I made the connection between, okay, when I'm not eating, I feel great. Obviously, there's an adaptation phase when you go from burning glucose to...
I'm curious. I don't understand how you've read your medical records.
Mm-hmm.
You've then been immersed in this psychology because you're believing that there's a thought implanted that it might be in your mind.
Well, that wasn't why I got into psychology.
No, I know that, but what I'm saying is there's this weird trigger where you go, I'm just going to do a water fast for a week. That's out the blue.
Well, I had been doing 24-hour fasts and I'd been finding them. I'd started with intermittent fasting because foods were causing gut pain and gastrointestinal disturbances, and it was almost immediate at times. When I ate certain foods, I would get really itchy hips.
Itchy hips?
Sore toes, big welts. I could show you pictures of big giant welts in my toes, all sorts of weird things. Itchy hips, like peripheral I think it's called peripheral neuropathy, and where you get
restless.
No, pins and needles.
Yeah.
And your fingers, get brain foggy, all these different symptoms.
And did you recognise what foods it was? Or what foods it were?
I did recognise a few foods. So definitely gluten was something that was influencing me. Most certainly certain nuts, particularly tomatoes, a nightshade. So if you've got autoimmune issues, most people have got autoimmune issues should probably avoid nightshades. That's not always the case, because again, sample of one, but nightshades, it's just because they have a lot of plant defense chemicals in them. And like some people can't eat bananas, some people can, some people can't eat tomatoes. There's certain groups of foods that are more potentially toxic than others. And if you've got a weakened immune system, they're going to be problematic. So again, like you said, it wasn't like just an overnight, I'm doing a week-long fast. It was intermittent fasting, 24-hour fast, you know, kind of trying to perform a strategic elimination diet, and then I went, screw it, let's just...
So concurrently you were running along lines of, you've read your medical records, you noticed that when you weren't eating, you were feeling better. When you were eating, you were getting these symptoms. At times. Then you started to intermittently fast.
Yeah.
And then it's progressively got to the point whilst you're reading the psychology, and you went, I'm going to try a week-long...
I was reading about evolutionary psychology and anthropology too. So my degree was actually, it started off philosophy of the mind and psychology. And so I was reading a lot of like ancestral wisdom and stoicism, along with evolutionary psychology, anthropology, these sorts of things, health psychology, but then obviously specializing in neuroscience and so on and so forth. So I made that connection, again, periodically also changing my diet, being the experimenter, if you will, throw on the metaphorical lab coat and goggles and embrace your inner Einstein. So I was making the connection between the habit and how it made me feel. Come back to how I get into psychology though, while I do all these fanciful things now, and it looks good on paper, my life was very different a number of years ago. So when I was 11, my uncle started to give me cannabis. By the time I was 15, this is a short version, I tried every drug you can imagine, even heroin, and then never really realised my academic potential or athletic potential in school. Born to being an entrepreneur, but they didn't teach enterprise skills. So I left school, I was on a Doggers card or truancy card. Doggers card, I know. Other interesting connotations. Drugs card for selling and smoking cannabis multiple times in school, and a behaviours card, the old C or an A.
They gave you a card for selling cannabis?
I was on a red, so I was one of few who had been on a behaviours card, a truancy card, and a red card. So it was a blue card for truancy, a yellow or a kind of luminous green card for behaviour, and then a red card. I don't know how I didn't get expelled, and I had the record at school for the most number of referrals to guidance. Not that that's anything to be proud of, to Mr. Kerr. And that was caused me to get suspended one time. But anyway, I was always in bother at school, right? And
so you're up to no good. You've been introduced to cannabis.
Big part of that was my dad rejecting me as well. So, that I wore that quite heavily. That was like a building on my back, and I didn't really realise how much that was affecting me. So I left school, I bounced around from unfulfilling job to unfulfilling job. You name it, I've done it. And then the drug dealing and drug taking intensified.
So we'll get you back to do the full booner.
Yeah.
Daddy issues, drugs, dealer, the whole 9 yards. So if you want to hear more about this, let us know.
Aye. But the short version is, took my first overdose at 19 in Magaluf, unintentional. Wasn't trying to take my life.
Wow.
22, I took a second on a Monday morning in a house party. I'd been on uppers for 4 days straight, bender, and then took way too much Valium. And it was like how, River Phoenix, the body didn't know what to do, and I woke up in the hospital.
Lord.
Anyway, and then in between that, I developed panic disorder. And this is, you asked about the psychological thing, what got you into psychology. So I developed panic disorder. Now, you mentioned about your friend with the heart issue. Panic disorder is the most acute form of anxiety a human can experience. I don't know if you've had a panic attack. Panic disorder is very uncomfortable. It felt for me like I was having heart attacks multiple times a day. That whole process spanned 3.5 years for me, and I was put on propranolol and beta blockers and all sorts of different medications. Anyway, it got to the point where I became a recluse, and my mum could not handle it anymore. She saw her son just deteriorating psychologically. So, she was constantly taking me to the hospital in the back of an ambulance strapped up to a heart monitor.
Because she thinks you're having a heart attack?
Because I think I'm having a heart attack. She's also scared. But then she got accustomed to this happening, knowing he's not having heart attacks, what's going on? But she didn't know how much drugs I was taking. She didn't know. I had some neurotic tendencies coupled with a very unhealthy lifestyle, a lot of drugs. My mum's very naive to all of that. She'd never taken a drug in her life. And then my friend had just died in front of me. So he was 36. We were working in Castlemilk, place in Glasgow. And we were putting in islands. I used to work on the roads, labouring, curbing. Yep. I don't look like a curber. You look more like a curber.
Have I got the curber look?
Aye, solid.
What's the telltale signs of a curber?
Just probably 5'5" to 5'8", strong as an ox, stocky. No me, buck 50 as they would say, built at the side of a fiver. Anyway, So I'm curbing. I'm on this job for a year. I built this relationship with Paul, who was my gaffer at the time. He was only 36, believe it or not. He had a young daughter at 17 and a daughter at 14, and a wife. And ultimately didn't really take good care of himself. Heavy drinker, heavy smoker, a lot of stress. Anyway, one day we're on site. He keels over in front of me and dies. He falls out the van. He looks to be taking a fit. The two other boys in the van, one goes to get the site health and safety, one goes to get a signal to call an ambulance. And I'm there, 19 years old, left him on with this guy. Don't know how to resuscitate him. Covered in blood, stops breathing, try to resuscitate him. Ambulance comes, very surreal, takes him away. I go home. I explain to my mother what had happened. She says, go and take a shower, son. That's heavy. I take a shower, come out the shower. My mum had put the phone down. She said, Paul died at the scene with you. And then for the...
Oh, you didn't know he was dead at this point?
No.
You think he's still there?
For the following...
And this is peak for people who have not connected. This is right in the middle of your peak drug
wildness,
taking.
yes.
Yeah.
Peak. And then...
So in terms of mental vulnerability,
yeah.
of the high volatility
yeah.
of the drug use, you're going through the roof,
yeah.
down through to rock bottom,
yeah.
through the roof, down through to rock bottom.
Part of the panic was the lifestyle. Part of the panic disorder was influenced and triggered by Paul's untimely death.
It's a concoction. I mean, it's not any one thing. It'll be the culmination.
Really. But also then my mum had remarried a new man, my stepfather. First year he was okay, but then there's only enough room for one alpha in the household. He was ex-SAS, PTSD issues, alcohol issues, and a lot of family baggage, and was mentally and physically abusive toward me. So that was all going on as well, and I felt like my dad had rejected me, and I felt slowly but surely I was losing my mum, and for a period of time I did. We have an amazing relationship to this day. Mum's an amazing person, but at that point she went through a bad couple of years. Anyway, to my point, my mum finally takes me to see the doctor. She says, you have to send my son to see a psychologist. He's not well. Finally, they cave after 3.5 years. I get sent to see a psychologist, and within 8 weeks I feel significantly better. And that sparked interest in psychology. She taught me basic psychology 101, mindfulness, CBT, cognitive reframing techniques, basic stuff. But it made me feel significantly better. Also though, it's hard to talk to your friends. I come from an environment where, the spirit of the times is dance music, rave music. If you're not smoking dope, chasing lassies and taking ecstasy, you're a woofter, you're a poof, you're ostracised. Apologies.
Sounds like good times.
There was some good times there, definitely. But that was the way of it, and that's the labels that you would have been given.
Yeah. And people don't know that. I mean, you're explaining 90s gay, right? There was that's a different word to the one that is today. Yeah. It's a very different word. It just meant that you were soft, you were not up for it, you were sort of not playing along with it.
Anybody could be gay.
Anybody
in the 90s, right? You don't want to play football, you're gay. Whatever. So again,
basically, if you're not getting involved, you're gay. That's it. That was the upshot of it.
Where was I there? So my mum...
It sounds like when you're saying this, I'm listening to this and I'm like, right, so you've been rejected, you feel like you're losing your mum. It may not have been the case, but you certainly felt that way. Yeah. You've been rejected, but not rejected. You're having a difficult time with the new man that your mum has at this point, and you've got rejected by your dad, and you've just lost like your best pal.
A bit of a mentor.
And it's like you have no adult influence to go to here. Yeah. You're missing somebody.
My grandmother was amazing. My grandmother gave me a lot of love, because I will never say that I come from nothing, because I had the love of my mother, I had the love of some aunties, and I love my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandmother partly raised me. She's passed on now. But I didn't really have strong male role models who had my best intentions at heart. My uncle was like, can you remember the guy from Shameless, Frank Gallagher, Scatter?
Yeah.
That's my uncle.
Was your psychologist male or female?
She was female.
Female.
She was awesome. I spent 8 weeks with her. I felt significantly better. And when I went home in the evening after the 8th week, I started old school dial-up internet. I went down to the library. I got all these books in psychology. I'm reading up on it. And I couldn't believe how much... I felt like every time I read a page, I immersed myself in it. It was like it was opening up new rooms in my house that I didn't know exist. And it just shifted my perspective. And it was changing how I was seeing the world and how I was able to show up, and slowly but surely the results that I was getting. And that's what they say, isn't it? Your thoughts become your feelings, become your actions, become your results. And your results, they dictate your themes of your days, weeks, months, and years. And I started to make that connection. And again, that's basic psychology. That sparked the interest in psychology.
And if people don't understand that, I mean, I've often, like, when I'm working with people who need, like, generally come to me for high performance, they're like, how do I break through the next level? And they'll say something to me, like they'll describe the result or the action, and I'll explain to them the thought, and they think it's like hocus pocus. I'm like, do you think this? And like, how did you know that? And I'm like, well, it's because there's a pattern of how, like, it's like the dominoes. If this one falls, it goes into there, it goes into there, and this one ends. It's like I'm not reading your mind. I'm just explaining how this thing works.
I can't believe how. Well, I can believe it because less than 5% of our global Western curriculum is dedicated to psychology, wellbeing science, and human flourishing. So it's no wonder we're suffering unnecessarily or just failing to realise our potential. But it pains me that people don't know. If you want to change your external world, you have to change your internal world. If you want to change
Michael Jackson songs, "The Man in the Mirror."
Exactly.
You know, if you want the outside world to change, you need to start with you.
You need to look in.
You can't
inside.
go shouting at the world. You need to start with you.
The physical. If you want to change the physical, you have to change the invisible.
Yeah.
And I started to awaken to that. Psychology is fascinating. You know, like there's so many different forms of it. There's so many different associated practices. There's so many different corresponding benefits. Like if you take, for example, emotional intelligence, right? Something that I think most men would probably consider to be a bit soft in terms of psychology.
Yes.
But if you look at emotional intelligence, they're now saying EQ over IQ as a greater predictor of success. And while it's difficult, truly difficult, to EQ meaning emotional quotient, how an indication of how emotionally intelligent you are, say you or I am, or a listener.
What would you describe that as? See, for people, because I think a lot of people would get they pick up the wrong end of the stick. How would you describe emotional intelligence?
It's a hard thing to quantify, but it's usually broken down into 4 different realms. So the mind's complex, right? But it's broken down into 4 different realms. Your ability to identify a range of emotions in yourself, your ability to identify a range of emotions in others, your ability to use those emotions effectively in daily life, and then your ability to govern and moderate your emotions. Now, coming back to using your emotions effectively in daily life, I always say, change your state, change your fate, right? So that means if you can change your psychological state, you can change your fate. Because what you think you become, right? So I want to give an example of how emotional intelligence is not soft. It's everything, in my opinion. So everyone knows the beast Eddie Hall, right? This is a story that will help people understand the power of emotional intelligence and how it can add value to your life, help you perform well. So everyone knows who Eddie Hall is, I'm sure, you know, one of few men, in current times at least, that's been able to lift 500 kilos, deadlift 500 kilos, right? And a good day, I don't even know if I could lift 150 kilos, right? But he lifted 500 kilos off the ground, deadlifted it, an amazing feat, right? But I don't know if you know much about the story about how he did that, but he talks about how he had to work with a psychologist, a hypnotherapist, and he had to go to a particular place psychologically to enable him to achieve this physical feat. So basically what he was doing was he was utilising his emotions effectively in daily life. So he worked with a psychologist to cultivate a particular frame of mind, to cultivate a certain emotional state. Mind feeds body, body feeds mind, so that he could create the correct physiological status or conditions to lift that 500 kilos off the floor. That's emotional intelligence personified. If you get what I'm saying, those 4 quadrants.
So emotional intelligence, from what you've described there, is first of all having the awareness and understanding about your emotions, and then how you can control and apply those emotions to getting positive and powerful results.
Yep.
There's people that don't know Eddie Hall's story. He was hypnotized to associate picking this deadlift up like he was picking a car up off his family who were trapped under the vehicle.
And also doing not bad men, breaking into the home was another one, and doing not so nice things to his wife and his children.
Yep,
so visualisation, tapping into the mind to create a physiological response.
Because what he was doing was associating these bad things to get that emotional response to protect and to essentially perform superhuman feats.
And he was actually tapping into what would be considered negative disempowering states: anger, fear, disgust, which is also a form of emotional intelligence. There's such a vast array of emotions, primary and secondary, and your ability to tap into them and use them to your advantage is a performance tool.
So he was tapping into emotions that people would generally avoid because of the negative connotations and using them to his advantage.
Exactly. And this is the thing, I think we are familiar with only certain emotions. The average person is anyway. And this comes back to not just, well, it does come back to performance, because if you know anything about performance, one of the strongest predictors of success is how optimistic you are. I get that being rational is important, but happiness and optimism is a strong predictor of success. Now, if you look at like emotional intelligence, we are familiar with a particular set of emotions because we're usually non-consciously navigating our way through lives. And while that's okay at times, because of the times that we live in a time where our environments are very influenced by the media, for example, the attention economy, and they're trying to hack your attention and capture it for as long as they can. And to do that, actually, they use some of the strongest disempowering states, fear, anxiety, and disgust. And they're trying to do that all the time. And the average person spends 4.5 hours of their waking day consuming that bullshit, non-needle moving material these days. Yep. So we're becoming very familiar because of our environments with these negative disempowering states.
Yep.
But we're not as accustomed to or familiar with these uplifting, spiriting, empowering states like gratitude, for example. I'm a big proponent of gratitude. And you're going to say something?
You look at, for instance, I've got two questions to ask you, but the first one was on your point to the social media. Because when I hypnotize people think that there's some like spookiness going on. And there isn't. There's a sort of process that takes place.
Yep.
And hypnosis is about focusing in or focusing on one thing and ignoring everything else. So what happens is your attention is placed on one particular thing.
Hyper-focused.
And if you look at someone, and I'm going to draw the analogy between, I'll explain which part of hypnosis you do, then the next, and then we're going to then connect that to what people are like on their phones and predominantly social media. So I get you to focus in on one thing so that all you're focusing on is this particular thing. They cue someone holding their phone and what they're doing. They're ignoring everything else, all the social environment, the awareness of what's going on, and they're glued to the phone. So there's step one.
Mind hacked.
Yep. Step two is I'm going to lead you to where I want you to go. So I'm going to describe the environment and put you in a particular state. So I'm going to change your state. I've got your focus and I'm going to change your state. So the algorithm on social media, more of what you want, more of what you want, more of what you want, more of what you want.
Yeah.
Now you're on the path of leading you. So say I wanted to do some hypnosis work with you and I wanted to change a bad pattern into a good pattern. I would lead you from your bad pattern, disconnect it and put in a new pattern.
Yep.
So I would lead you. And what social media does is it leads you, it gives you what you want, gives you what you want, gives you what you want. And then at the end of this doom scroll, you're where they want you to be.
Yeah.
And through that process is they've just overloaded your dopamine system with hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. And you can see why people are sitting there on the end of the phone. And the process is the same of taking your focus, leading you, pacing you, getting to the point where you want, and then giving you the instruction. And then before you know it, you're like, I don't know why I ordered that particular thing, or I don't know why I ordered this, or I don't know how I just spent 1 hour doom scrolling on Instagram.
Yeah.
And that same process in the mind that a hypnotist would use is exactly the same as what social media is doing with algorithms and feeding you. You look, you can see how many times do you see people doing
into
it?
that dopaminergic pathway. The dopaminergic pathway that, dopamine's involved with reward and motivation. It's triggered by two things. Novelty. That's why the thumbing effect is a real effect,
New, more,
novelty.
fresh.
And then also your perception of progress.
Yeah.
So that's if you're looking to set a goal, that's why it's really important to be reviewing your goals visually and have like a checker, because it's, one of the things.
Did you ever remember the rat experiment they done with the treats and the lever? I don't know if you remember this.
Yep.
I don't know if I've got the numbers right, but they'll be in the ballpark. So the experiment was the dopamine response in rats, and they would hit this lever and a treat would come out, and the rats would hit this lever in a minute. They would hit it 60 times. So they were essentially hitting this lever once every second to get a treat. when they changed the treat dispenser to distribute a treat every second time the lever was hit, the rats would hit that lever 800 times a minute. So they would be hyper fixated on more, to the point that they would go absolutely to hysteria to get that dopamine hit again.
And while we're on this topic, I think it's important to touch on some, I guess, a couple of decades of psychological research whittled into a few sentences. Because, what's a podcast about? It's about impacting people positively. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. 30, 40 years of research whittled down into a few sentences. If you want to be psychologically stable, make your life a focus of money, fame, and beauty. If you want to be psychologically unstable, I think I said stable. If you want to be psychologically unstable, make your life a focus of money, fame, and beauty. If you want to be psychologically stable, make your life a focus of personal development, meaningful relationships, and community contributions. And that was my past life versus my future life, essentially. Now, caveat, I'm not saying you can't wake up in the morning and beautify yourself. You woke up this morning, I woke up, we flossed, we brushed our teeth, we put some roll-on, we stuck a fresh t-shirt on, whatever. But it's that over-focus on beauty. I'm not saying you can't pursue money, but for me, for example, money is a means to an end. It enables me to perpetuate positive messages, and it enables me to be more philanthropic, right? I'm not just heedlessly pursuing money. And again, fame, when I was younger, I kind of, through the selling and taking of drugs, I wanted that notoriety in a sense. Now, you get a sense, I've got some notoriety, but that wasn't my intention. It's because I'm doing good work, I'm being purposeful, I'm mastering a craft, and that just comes anyway.
You get notoriety for the right reasons. I mean, I think the thing is there's ways you can get the same outcome, but the roads to them are very, very
Look
different.
At Love Island, money, fame, beauty versus meaningful relationships, personal development, and community contributions. And actually, if you look at the community contributions piece and we go into human happiness, we talked about your emotional landscape, your physiological plane, negative 10 plus 10. One of the modules that I teach a lot on is human fulfillment and happiness. 80% of society are fulfilling their happiness quota through what we call raw sense pleasures. So you get the dopamine hit from your phone, pornography, masturbation, sex, a bowl of vanilla ice cream, the wee pug dug, buying puppies and dogs or whatever, over focus on your work tops, going on holiday, the fast car. I'm not judging them. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm saying they shouldn't be the primary means by which you fulfill your happiness quota. They should be the cherry on the cake.
Yeah.
And there's these two other forms of happiness and fulfillment that most of society doesn't know about. I didn't either. And I had to experience depths of unnecessary suffering to find that information and knowledge, which is why I'm so motivated to do what I do now, which is why I started a business, to share that information.
So what are the two reasons?
So the two other forms of happiness are, number one, living the engaged life. If you think, just generally speaking, disengaged life versus I'm fully enthused, I'm fully enthralled, I'm captivated by things, as opposed to I'm disengaged, I'm unenthused, I can't be arsed. Right? So the engaged life, and there's a formula to achieve that. Know your high strengths and engage with them daily. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then you've got the other form, which is arguably the most meaningful form of happiness, the most fulfilling form of happiness. There's 2 or 3 avenues to achieve this, but one is know your highest strengths, or the formula is know your highest strengths, engage with them daily, but in service of something greater than you. So then it comes back to, what are your highest strengths? How can you engage with them daily? And what are you going to contribute to the world that's about more than just you? And again, that comes back to those couple of sentences there.
Yeah,
meaningful relationships and community contributions.
I had two in my head. And when you started, I was like, right, I've got 2 different ones. And then as you described them, I was like, no, they're exactly the same.
Do you mean strength?
No, the 2 things that most people, I think that there's
the
6.
Raw sense pleasures?
Yeah, there's 6 things that people pursue in life. 4 of them everybody know, and 2 of them very few people don't. And it's usually through extreme suffering that they find the final 2.
Yeah.
Or you usually find really lost, highly successful people that look like they have everything but feel like they have nothing, and they find the last 2. And it's because they've pursued so doggedly the first 4 and became notoriety, significance, cultivated relationships, usually hollow relationships.
Yeah.
you know, I know such and such, the usual cocktail bar chat.
Yeah.
You know, I know the blah, I know someone else,
Yeah.
name dropping, hollow chat,
Yeah.
hollow connections.
Yeah.
And then it's usually they've lost the things that are significant. So I would have said that the things that you're serving higher than yourself is traditionally your kids.
Yeah.
So your kids, your family, loved ones.
Those you love and lead in your community.
It's the people that need it, that you can help. And you help them for nothing other than just helping them. And the fulfillment is, I don't think there's a greater fulfillment than that.
No,
and
I don't think so either, mate. I think you're right. If you look at, so for me, they say there's a psychologist that has this line: a man or a woman without a strong sense of meaning and purpose will fall victim to indulgences, vices, and other self-sabotaging ways, right? A man or a woman without a strong sense of meaning and purpose will fall victim to indulgences, vices, and other self-sabotaging ways. If I look at my past life, I was aimless. I was aimlessly navigating my way through life. I didn't have a plan for my life. I didn't have a vision. And when I got there, I didn't recognise it because I didn't plan to be there in the first place. I didn't have, if I knew what a vision board was or goals were when I was 12, 13, 14, I wouldn't have picked facing 2 years in jail, 2 overdoses, all these crappy things that happened to me. But I didn't have a plan for my life. I didn't understand that concept. I wasn't aware of that concept. So I ended up somewhere and I didn't like it, when I got there.
Do you not think it's funny when you get life and it knocks you into this sort of, it knocks you into the place that you don't know why you're there. And you think, what am I doing here? And then slowly you fall into this thing and you realise this is where I was always meant to be. But at the time you think, what has happened? How did I get here?
Right.
Isn't that a crazy thing that we experience?
I think, like, there's a lot of knowledge and information out there that would enable people to, I think a lot of people are stuck at that +3 zone. And if they could truly understand even just that segment that we were talking about there, I guess, on happiness, raw sense pleasures versus your highest strengths, knowing what they are. Like, your high strengths are what you've been born with combined with what you've been exposed to and experienced. And usually your high strength is so hard to uncover because it's so natural to you. You usually need, like, for example, one of my high strengths is a form of social intelligence. It's the ability to engage people easily and develop relationships rapidly. I didn't know that until a couple of years back, well, as a result of studying psychology. But if I look at my past life, there is a psychological process, and I can share some places that people can go and take some tests. But if I look at my past life, my grandmother used to always say, our Ross could speak to Tam the devil. And that's always been a thing for me. And it's not effortful, it's effortless. And your strengths are not like habits. They're not habits. Habits are, you build them through effort. Your strengths can be nourished. You can put yourself in favourable conditions to be advantaged as a result of them, but they're effortful. Like when I'm in Morrison's and I bump into somebody, let's say we'd never met the way we met and I bumped into you in Morrison's, usually within 15 to 30 seconds, I'm on first name terms with you. I know your kids' names. I know what you do for a living. We might even have exchanged WhatsApps or LinkedIn details or Instagram accounts or something like that. But that happens not effortfully, it happens effortlessly. I didn't realise that was one of my highest strengths growing up or until I was an adult, because I worked through this psychological process, this sort of sequential process. And now, like, if you think about it, if you don't know your strengths, that means you're forever operating for the weakest parts of yourself. So it's an element of self-awareness. And there's a positive psychologist called Martin Seligman. He's the founding father of positive psychology, which is a form of psychology for the last 300 years has been focused on the disease model. How can we take people from a -10, a -5, a -3 back to baseline to feel that they're part of society again and they're free from psychological malady? But positive psychology, a form of psychology, says, hold my beer. I'm tasking myself with the mission of what's beyond baseline, +3, +9, +99, human fulfillment and flourishing. And he, there's fascinating research, PERMA models, so on and so forth, but he talks about strengths and there's a signature strengths test. Now, I've been part of, like, probably taken maybe over 100 psychometric tests in my time through my studies, my psychological studies. And this one, the Authentic Happiness Signature Strengths Test, or the VIA Character Strengths Test, has had the most profound effect on me. VIA stands for Virtues in Action. And basically you get a summation of 24 character strengths. You take the test and then you need to think, okay, it'll spit you out, say, 4 or 5 signature strengths. So for me, it's, say, top 1, social intelligence. Then you need to start thinking, do I, when I'm in a flow state, was I operating from one of my signature strengths here? If I look back at my past, did this person or that person look for evidence almost, you know? It's a fascinating, you should try it, Gio. It's a fascinating experiment.
I'm going to give it a go.
It's really good.
So what, do you just go online to do it?
You can go on to AuthenticHappiness.org, and they have a pull down. There's a few pull downs actually. And you go to the surveys and it'll say something like VIA signature strength test or character strengths test, I think it is.
I've done Jordan Peterson's test, and there was no grey area. I was either the 99th percentile or right at the other end.
So it was really binary what you were. I don't know the test. I don't know what the context is.
And I had really weird contradictions. They sort of worked, but it was that whole I would need to pull up the test, because I actually said to my wife, I think this test's a lot of shite. And I showed her the thing. She's like, it's absolutely on the money. But it's amazing how you
need other people
in
that process, uncovering your virtues in action, your core genius, if you will. And everybody has them, by the way, and you can't have mine and I can't have yours. And it's about how do you justify and rationalize that. To give people a wee bit more on this, because I'd love them to take the test. When I say it's a combination of what you've been born with combined with what you've been exposed to and experienced, right? So I was born with
Is that nature and nurture?
In a sense.
In essence.
So what was I born with? I was born with a kind of outgoing, gregarious, warm personality in a sense, right? And then I was raised in a kind of Scottish, Irish, Italian family. I'm not Italian, but you get what I mean. They all shout a lot. There's loads of people in. I would always be on my wee granny's armchair. Coffee conversations were happening all day, every day with all sorts of different peoples giving me different looks and feels. Now, I'm being programmed with a certain skill set there. Mm-hmm. Being able to make coffees and teas and chat to lots of males and females. Because subconsciously, I'm developing a strength because of what I've been born with, a particular personality and tendencies, combined with what I've been exposed to and experienced. And then to further that, I've had so many different jobs in life. I've been a fishmonger, as I said earlier on. I've done topless butlering and stripping. I've sold drugs. I've been an athlete. I've worked with high level CEOs. I've met Michael Dell, the 37th richest man in the world. I've had all these different looks and feels. I've been addicted to drugs. I've sat next to people taking heroin and all sorts of other stuff. So I've had all these different looks and feels. So again, what you're born with combined with what you've been exposed to and experienced throughout life, coalescing to create a signature strength for you to tap into, but most people don't have an awareness of them. And I always say, the deeper you go, the more you know, the quicker and further you'll grow, and the more fulfilled you'll be.
So does the test tell you what you, how would it identify what you were born with, or do you need to try and guess that? Because I'm assuming it's giving you what you are, it's not giving you the constituents of what you were born with.
It's giving you what you are. I've actually, it's like the whole Bruce Lee thing. I've taken elements of what I've learned over the years and created like a sequential process, 5-6-step system.
Yep.
But ultimately, to begin the process, you need to take the test. It takes 30 minutes. It'll spit you out all these different character strengths. So earlier on, I kind of almost shot myself in the foot. I said, you can't have my strength and I can't have yours, right? But that's true and not true, because you could be socially intelligent, but your rationale as to how you are that is different from mine.
Yep.
One of my strengths is creativity, right? You could have the strength of creativity, but my particular form of it is I'm good with words. So, for example, I just said earlier on there, the deeper you go, the more you know, the quicker and further you'll grow, and the more fulfilled you'll be. Those wee poetic utterances, if you will, come out of me. I used to write a lot of music when I was younger. Now I attach them to my craft. Food can be your friend or foe. Either way, it'll let you know. Treat your gut bad and it'll make you sad. Treat your gut good and it'll enhance your mood. And in brackets, a whole host of other things. These little poetic utterances come out of me. So creativity, but a particular form of it, creating,
so
utilising words.
Did you win the Robbie Burns Award when you were at school?
And I did.
Yeah,
I genuinely did. Timorous wee beastie. I honestly did. So it's like, you could be creative, but maybe your form of creativity is like my other half, Faye. She's an interior decorator. So you've saw my brochure for the retreat, right? She made that. That would pain me to do anything digitally creative.
Yes.
See what I'm saying?
Yep.
Still a form of creativity. And I'm quite good strategically in business. She'd be lost with that.
Yep.
So there's different ways that creativity can be applied. So you can be creative, but you can't be my form of creativity, if that makes sense.
It's like we've all got fingers, we can have the same fingers, but we've got a unique fingerprint on it.
Aye, so you're going to say something completely different there. Your style of fingering or something.
Fingering's out of fashion. It seems to have fell out before. It's a shame that. It's a shame it's missing in society.
I don't know if you've seen the comedian online. He's quite a heavy guy. He's an American, and he does all these different.
I've seen him. It's funny.
He's got
really funny.
It's American words, but he's got the brownies. He's got he does all the.
It's like. What's the sign language for fingering?
Aye.
And he's got all the names attached to it.
It's really hilarious. Good. We went for psychology and deepest strengths to fingering.
Look, that's quite the range and polarity is what makes stuff.
Yeah. So AuthenticHappiness.org or the VIA signature strengths test. Take the test, 30 minutes, uncover your strengths, start to think on it, look at your past. This is your life. Look for evidence for that particular the top 3 strengths. Yep. Ask your partner or someone who won't judge you, because when it's personal development in Scotland, people are like, oh, what's this? Yep. Find someone who will be all about that, who will give you an objective viewpoint, and then put together, amalgamate, coalesce what the test says objectively, what you think, what the evidence from your past life shows, and ultimately how you feel. So when I leave you in this makeshift scenario where we've been in Morrison's or Waitrose, if we're in the West End, and I've just exited that experience, that moment with you, it wasn't effortful, it was effortless, and I kind of feel a bit fulfilled.
Yeah.
Not high, but fulfilled. Like if I'm on stage and I'm using, so boldness is another one of my signature strengths, right? It was a bastard in the past because I was bold in an unhealthy way with drugs, but now I'm bold on stage, and when you can combine boldness and creativity, 2 of my signature strengths, I'm on stage and I get very animated, plus I'm utilising those words, but come back to the happiness in service of something greater than me. I'm on stage not to be a guru, not to have people look up to me or look up at me, but to be there for people, because I live every day to be the me that I never had. I just want to help people. It's amazing the feeling it gives me, but it's a deep feeling of fulfillment because I'm utilising my highest strengths in service of something greater than me.
The two
I know it's quite complex.
No, I followed along.
But definitely test the waters there.
You're describing some of the modules. Like, what can you help people with this? Is this something that you teach? Like, what can you do with people? Say they've been fascinated and like, hey, look, I'm interested in this, Ross. Yeah. How would they end up working with you?
So the challenge for me has been, people do want to work with me, but for the last 8 years, 95% of my work has been behind the scenes, working with entrepreneurs, athletes, or organizations, small and large. And I've never really had a scalable version of me, a way to scale me, a product, an app, an online course, because I've been so caught up in that. Now that I'm more stable financially, I can take a step back. And my goal is, I've just launched the retreat, which I'm sure we'll get into, but that's one way that they can interact with me and go deep for a couple of days. But ultimately, my plan after the retreat is to sit back and have conversations with educated people. I think I mentioned this to you on our initial call, and look at, what is the best scalable way for me to do this? Because I've always wanted to make documentaries. I've always wanted to have a scalable system, but not just a scalable system. I feel like you've got elements of biology, psychology, well-being science, and human flourishing, all of which I've studied not all of it, that would be impossible, but I've studied a lot of these forms. And what I like to do is break it down into its most digestible component parts so that people can implement it, right? You can create change at the behavioural level. So what I want to do is -10 + 10. Emotional landscape, physiological plane. I want to help people figure out where they're at, and then I want to teach them modularly, it's a hard word to say, modularly, all the different components, because it's impossible. I had to learn it over months, years, decades even. So what I'd like to do is to give them the 80-20 principle, the best 20% of the topic to create 80% of the value for them, and break it down into modules. So 16 years studying sleep science, I could probably spend 3 days with someone, 2 days, and they would know more than 99% of people, they would know how to optimize their sleep and improve their energy, mood, and mojo. Sleep's quite an interesting one because it's binary. It's ones and zeros. Once you've learned it, you've learned it. It's a bit different with the mind because there's a lot more implementation and time that's required to get the results or to break past conditioning or deal with past trauma and reframe that. But fasting is also a very black and white one, but there's so many components within just the mind: self-awareness, happiness, emotional intelligence, so on and so forth.
What do you, so first thing that comes to mind, you should have a course. There should be a digital course, an online
That's the plan.
course.
The plan is...
Why is this not been done yet?
Just
It's
because
an
I
open
was-
goal here. I can see this. I'm like, right, so someone comes in, they sit that test, video one,
Yeah.
you know, and you can see the sequence.
Yeah.
You're taking them through, you're giving them that 20%, and you're saying here, here, here.
Yep.
And that would be a great product.
I would tell you this, the reason it hasn't happened yet is because for the first couple of years, I was mastering the craft. For the second couple of years, I was continuing to master the craft and learned how to articulate. I didn't always speak the way I speak. I come from Airdrie. I come from Glenmavis, from a really impoverished working class background. So I spoke a bit neddy. So I had to work on my speech. I had to work on how I enunciated and articulated. And so it was like craft plus speech, and not just speech to speak properly, but to engage people so that they can fully digest it. And then thinking about, well, I can speak now, I can engage people, but are they really getting it? Is it fun? You know, it's like if I tell you a shit joke, I'm going to know it's shit because you're not going to laugh.
Yep.
If I tell you a good joke, you'll laugh. And if I tell you a proper good joke, you'll laugh and you'll give it. So I'm approaching it like that. I need to tell people a really good joke so they give it. So they absorb it themselves and they teach it to others, because teaching is learning it twice. So that's how I approach my craft. So it was craft plus speaking plus helping people fully understand it and digest it. Then there was a behavioural change component. Then I was working in corporate, working with athletes, developing mental models and frameworks and making this my own thing. Now I'm ready to share it.
Yeah. What do you, so you mentioned the retreat, like how did the retreat come about? Interesting angle.
Yeah. So
Of all the routes you could have went down.
yeah, I always wanted to do it. I like working with people intimately and intensely. I think there's a lot that can happen. You know, for me, a pause is a transformative experience. So if you pause, if you want to go fast, you need to slow down. So if you pause, if you take a strategic pause for a day, 2 days, 3 days, this is why the tagline is 3 days to transform your next 3 decades. Some might say that's a bit of a tagline. Is there truth to that? Of course there's truth to it, because you can learn something in half an hour that could change your next 3 decades, you know? So 3 days to sit down, and ultimately why I decided to launch the retreat, so it's a male-only retreat. I decided that because ultimately I look around, I see a lack of resilience in males, I see the emotional energy of the world flatlining, particularly in males. I'm seeing a lot of loneliness. I myself moved from pub culture, party boy lifestyle, to become a father, a businessman and a leader. And when I'd done that, I accidentally and unintentionally isolated myself, and I felt lonely and it didn't feel too nice. So I started to open up about that on stage. Other men expressed a similar sentiment. It got me thinking. And then I looked around and I see all these communities, and there's, again, I mentioned this to you on an initial call, but there's pure business communities, there's pure fitness communities, and there's recovery communities for those who have issues with drugs and alcohol. But where are the communities that facilitate growth across the important domains of life? Biological, psychological, spiritual, and financial. So I wanted to facilitate growth for men across all those domains, and also the aspirational goal is to elevate the standard of modern man in the UK, modern working class, middle class man in Scotland, the UK and beyond, but primarily in Britain, because it's not anywhere where it's not where it needs to be. I think it can be so much higher. And I'm not saying I'm some sort of guru and perfect. Like, I just have some tools to deal with inevitable challenges when they arise. And I'm not a finished product, of course. I'm flawed, I'm human, but I've made my highs higher, more sustained, and my lows less low and less often. And I don't know everything, but I know a lot about a little. And I want to share that. I want to improve the lives of other men, because I know that habits aren't taught, they're caught. So if I can improve your life, someone listening's life, then ultimately they become a better version of themselves. And there's a ripple effect of that. And I've got a daughter. I'm going to marry her off to a guy, not a plonker, hopefully. I've got nephews. They're males between the ages of 1 and 11. I want them to have role models. They don't have great dads. One has a half decent dad, one doesn't have a dad. So I'm kind of the head of the family now. And then there's beyond my family and the community. So I wanted to create an experience where guys could come in, and guys that are already doing quite well in life, and facilitate growth across all those domains. And I didn't want it to be just 3 days and done holiday brochure moments. I wanted to really create resilience groups. So if you look at the longest lived people on this earth, there's pockets of them peppered throughout the globe. They've shifted. There used to be Loma Linda, California, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia. They've shifted, but there are still these blue zones, people that have regions that have a lot of people that are 100 or over and healthy within those years. And one of the key elements that connects them is that they have resilience groups. In one region, they call it a MOI. So I want when the guys sign up for the retreat, I want to start to synergize them. I don't wait to the retreat to bond them. We do that beforehand.
What's a resilience group? Like, what does that mean?
Just means like there's been psychological research for the last 50 years that shows that, 50 years ago, every man had up to 3 males that they could confide in without judgment. So I could tell you about my, what's going on with my missus. I could tell you about how I feel about life, talk politics, give you my opinions and beliefs without fear of, being judged or blowback. Even if you had a difference of opinion, you could have, just like camaraderie, but also, whether it's your anything. I could confide in you about anything, right? Dark, maybe I'm having some dark thoughts, I'm not feeling too good. 50 years ago, most men had up to 3 guys that they could confide in, confidants, without fear of judgment. Every 10 to 15 years, that number has dropped to where today most men have 0 to maybe a half a friend. I mean, statistically, 1 to 0 friends that they could confide in. So there's a lot of men out there that don't have someone that they can chat to.
And is there like rules?
That's a resilience group is essentially people that you can go to and they'll celebrate with you in your greatest successes. They won't be jealous. And also people that you can go to in your darkest times and they'll lift you up.
And are you filtering that group out to see that they're all a good fit?
They are. I just know that. So like, there's a lot, obviously I've spoken to a lot of people and some people can't come because, finances or, time's not right or they've got a family holiday booked. You can tell the guys that are speaking from a truthful place there, and I understand that. But there's also other guys that just aren't the right fit. And what I've found is that the guys that are the right fit, they're all different. They look different. They sound different. They span the ages of 25 to 52. But ultimately, they all share two things. They all want to be a better man, and they all have a positive energy about them, a positive way about them, and they're open-minded. I guess that's 3 things.
Yeah. No,
so
that's cool.
I want to develop these resilience groups, synergize them, deepen the bond through shared experiences, and then there's a continuity of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also it's about who you rub shoulders with while you're there. Relational capital, finding the guys that are smarter than you, that are fitter than you, and you can become that. Some of the greatest advances in my life have come through the relationships. People coming into my world, that have elevated me personally and professionally. And so I want to facilitate, while there's a lot of like-minded entrepreneurs and ambitious professionals, very successful in their own right, spanning different industries, I've brought in a number of speakers as well. UFC athlete Paul Craig's coming along, the former chairman of Gymshark. And there's two men behind Gymshark. There's the man who founded it, Ben Francis, but then the 2 older, uglier males behind Gymshark, their words, not mine, Paul Richardson and Steve Hewitt. Paul's a mentor to me, he's coming along, and other speakers, and there's a longevity scientist coming, a female, because we then get to learn their success frameworks and their strategies, and we get to speak to them, and then there's a bit of a mastermind element too.
So how do people get in touch with you if they like what you're saying here? So
do you mean about the retreat, or do you mean just in general?
I mean, just like, we've discussed so far, blood markers, biomarkers, the emotional scale. What would you call it? Emotional landscape?
The emotional landscape.
The emotional landscape.
These are all concepts that I've built, that are mine, that I've built over the
What was the one
years.
that was above it? There was
the emotional landscape and the physiological plane.
Yeah,
Just think physically
plane.
And mentally.
Yeah.
-10 + 10.
Yeah. So say they're out there and like, I need to find out.
Yeah.
And they're interested in finding out what you're up to.
Periodically, I offer one-to-ones, rare. I now have Better Man, for example. So that's a number of low cost to no cost events. We've got one this Sunday in Glasgow, but that's obviously you're limiting people geographically there. But we've got an event in Scotstoun in Glasgow. It's an experience wrapped around a Paralympic athlete and males coming together and whatnot. They can reach out to me on Instagram or LinkedIn, Man in the Cap, as always. Ross Anderson Official on Instagram. I have just acquired a lab. So that means that, not a bricks and mortar lab, but it means that all these services that I offer, VO2 max, DNA testing, epigenetic testing, blood work, all of that, now I can do a lot more of it in-house. So that will come to fruition in the next 3 to 6 months. And that enables me to do as little as 3 biomarkers to as many as 500 and all sorts of other
someone that's saying,
testing.
look, I'm interested in finding out. I mean, I can think of, off the top of my head, people that would be interested in this.
Yeah, even if in the next 3 months they can come to Beyond Baseline. Prior to that, I can hook them up. I can just send them to a lab, like no problem at all. In terms of the retreat, we close the doors next week, 10 days. I'm going out to Marbella this Friday just to do some behind the scenes, talking to our partners and so on and so forth. We've got 2 spots left. So if anyone's remotely interested, 2 spots left. It's 300 quid to secure your deposit. And then you can split it, pay in full or monthly payments. I think it's very financially fair. And it's also designed with entrepreneurs and ambitious professionals in mind. So, 2.5 day experience, 2 opportunities to check in with their friends, their families, and their employees as well. But yeah, they can connect with me there. I can share my WhatsApp details or something like that, and we can send over brochures or whatever.
Sounds good. Well,
and in time, obviously, I'll be launching a program. That's my next goal. Post June, sit down. I'm looking at a book, finishing my book, and launching an online course or something like that. A module.
I think you should be starting it tonight. I think the module should be done
like that. Boom.
This is
AI.
Fucking June.
Yeah.
What you talking? I don't even think you need AI. Well, you can do AI.
I wouldn't do AI. It would just be me. I could never. Every post I write.
I've used AI loads, and it's good for donkey work. But see, when it comes to actually writing out what you want, I'm like, nah.
Because it has to come for me. Nah. And also, I get a lot of people mentioning. So if I do Instagram stories, usually I'm doing my Instagram stories. I'm a terrible speller because I'm a little bit dyslexic. I don't like to tell people that because I just think we're in this culture of labels. But I'm a bit dyslexic. I only found it out later on in life, and it makes a lot of sense to me now, looking back. But I can't spell. I'm useless. Like someone recently just said, "Oh, Ross, ads is spelled DDS." Honestly, I'm constantly saying to Faye, how do you spell this? How do you spell that? Simple words. And my mind wants to spell what? WHAT, WOT. And it's like a natural impulsive thing, even though I know. And there's other little ways that like I read really slow. So if Faye and I are watching something on Netflix and there's subtitles, I'm on the first word and she's finished the 2 sentences.
I bet she never lets you forget.
Aye. I'm useless at those sorts of things. But anyway, yeah, they can connect with me. I'd love to connect with anyone who is in need of getting back to baseline or wants to move beyond.
Sounds pretty incredible. I know some people will be listening to this episode and be definitely getting involved in that. We've done some lab testing.
You're going to do an event.
The what?
You're going to do this. You're going to do a big event soon. So
I am.
We can get. I'm happy to come along and
Massive
get involved.
Event.
I'd love to do that. I've always wanted to do a huge event myself.
Massive.
And I just don't think there's enough of it here in Scotland. Maybe it's because there's not the market for it. I think it's changed.
The market's there.
But I think that the standard, you're seeing all these places pop up now with red light, cold dip, sauna. I don't think that's not much of a standard, man. I think we should be pushing the boat. Like in 2 or 3 years, again, another conversation we had, I'm looking to have a haven. I want to future-proof myself and my community and my country against the ills that are coming. I don't think, I'm not thinking dark and there's only dark times ahead. I think optimistically, but also I think with the rise of AI and the ability that's going to give our government to control us and mind hack us and shape us even more so, I want to safeguard against that for other people. I want to give them a place, a sanctuary, if you will, a place where they can get away from EMFs, a place they can get away from social media, and it's just social media free, technologically free spaces.
But it's something like you go, we know how they're mind hacking you, and we know the tools that they're going to use. How about we mind hack you to be phenomenally successful and happy in any which way you decide? And you can now shield yourself from just being the sheep that's getting battered along with the tools.
I want people to come along to. I think when it comes to well-being, the goalposts are shifting. People ask me, what do I do for my well-being? And now the number one thing that I would suggest is I want you to detach from your device. Mm-hmm. Like, I use my device, right? But I have no anxiety about taking that device, turning it off, putting it in a drawer and leaving it for a week or 2 or 3 or 4. Of course, I've got a business to run, and my business isn't a business yet because I'm working toward it being operating while I'm sleeping and operating while I'm away. But if you can't go a half day, a day without your phone, and it's causing you anxiety, you are an addicted user, and that's fine because it's the silent addiction that everyone's experiencing right now.
Yes.
But you want to have a solution, you want to have the playbook as to how you can navigate that space more intelligently, because those sub 25, they don't have a reference point for a life without it, and it's on us to be dutiful.
We're the last generation that knows what true boredom is.
And that's why I want to create, exactly. I want to create these environments where kids can go and play unsupervised by adults without technology. Yep. But at the same time, you've got think tanks and a gym and an optimization space and a spa and just this and acres of land. And I've got all these thoughts. That will happen in the next 2 to 3 years. And I don't want to half-arse it. There's a natural process. I think the book and the online course and building the platform.
Soft as fuck.
I'm soft compared to you anyway.
Fucking hell. If it's a good idea, do it now.
Aye. Well, you can help me with the investment.
It's not a fucking plant you're growing, mate. Seed in it needs to grow. It's a fucking idea. Get it going.
Right. Well, we'll get a wise council together in a few months and we'll make it happen.
I'm ready. So somebody needs to be able to crack this whip.
Definitely, you do. You need people to hold you to a higher standard, and I love it when I was on the call to Gio, we were having a conversation initially, and I love it when people say, okay, I'm going to say something that you may or may not like. I love when people say those sorts of things because you know it's something that you need to hear, and I think, you said, I'll kind of quote you in this, I'm paraphrasing, but I sniff or I whiff a lot of potential here. I think you need to be thinking bigger, and while I'm massaging a lot of like really good relationships right now, it is coming to that crucial time. You said earlier on, you're exactly where you need to be. I think right now, I do the retreat. It's the first retreat, took a lot of hard work. Established that foundation, Better Man's trademark. I've got Beyond Baseline, the lab, that's evolving. And the next 6 months, it's book course or something of that ilk, and then the haven.
You better not take 6 months to do this. You better.
Right, well, you can help me achieve it. And
better sort that out.
I'm a big believer though in asking these questions, like how can you achieve your 6 months goals in 6 weeks? I love questions like that.
Better. I like where you're going with this.
Aye.
Much better.
That's a good question.
That is better. That's better. I like the change. The delta looks good now. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you, man.
We're definitely going to get you back because it was great. It was great chatting to you, and we had a great call initially. Getting to know a bit more about yourself and your story, and I think that'd be great to do a full episode on things that we've spoke about, epigenetics, the art of fasting, all the different sort of curious and weird and wonderful tangents and psychology that you found along your way. The blood is fascinating. I'm doing blood testing just now in terms of my hematocrit level. I managed to get up to 60, so I think we've got some great sort of stuff.
Are you trying to elevate?
Yeah. Train at altitude.
You should train in the altitude centre.
Yeah, I do. I train at altitude, train at 4,000 metres.
Yeah.
So
I've spent some time in the altitude training centre when I was training to break the burpee world record.
Well, you feel it. I didn't realise how euphoric you feel
crazy.
When you come out.
And you really need to accentuate your breathing, otherwise you will collapse if you're going at pace and your oxygen sats drop below 75. Yeah. That happened to me and I was like,
what did you get it down to?
It was about 70 and I went really lightheaded.
I've had it in the 60s.
Aye.
And they were actually like, I remember reading Jocko Willink's book and they'd done the same dive training and there was a phrase that they would say and it's that I'm feeling fine, and if you could enunciate the F, they knew you were okay. And I remember saying that and I was like, I'm feeling fine. And I thought, I'm still good. And I could feel the kind of the tunnel coming in. I thought,
it's an odd sensation. If you're ever looking for a guest, an interesting guest, one of my friends, Richard Hamilton, he's a climber. So he's in a couple of months, he's going to summit Everest. And if he does that, and I believe he will, he's attempted before, If he does it this time, he's one of, say, 100 or 200 people that's climbed all the highest peaks in every continent around the world in a short period of time. He's done, I don't know how you pronounce this, Ubris in Russia. He's done that 2 or 3 times.
Nice.
He's got some crazy stories.
And
he's a behemoth. He's done, what was his last venture? His last venture was Marathon des Sables. It's 6 back-to-back marathons in 5 days in the Sahara Desert. It drops to -5 to 10 and elevates to +50. You have to take anti-venom kit. You have to sleep with goggles on and it's incredible.
Wow.
And he reached out to me because he wanted someone who was at least on par with him, because he knew that I'd broken the burpee world record and I was into psychology and all these sorts of things. When he was attempting some of these climbs, he wanted someone he felt that he could be held accountable, or he could be accountable to. And our first interaction together when we met was we ran up Ben Nevis and back down in sub 3 hours. I was like, he's like, you're going a bit slow here. He's a beast.
Wow. Well,
he's a beast. And we're the exact same age, born a week apart. Really good guy, good friend of mine. Fascinating stories.
Let's get him on.
But all his climbs, his last climb he saw.
Is he here?
He's in Fife.
Fife.
He travels all over. His last story was I don't want to waste this, but I'll give you an insight. He was climbing up a mountain, obviously a very treacherous mountain, and he's 80% of the way to the top. It's almost a whiteout, and he sees something in front of him, and it turns out to be a man's hand that had passed away a couple of days earlier. And you're trying to focus, you're trying to be hyper focused on your next step and your breathing, and I don't know if people know how hard that is. And he sees the wedding ring, and he starts to think about his wife and his kids. He's got 3 kids, and how do you? Yeah. It's like stay on course, And he's seen them on the way up, but then he knows he has to see him again on the way down. He's got all sorts of crazy stories that he can articulate much better than I can.
It's a must.
Anyway, thank you. Good. Appreciate you, man.
Well, thanks for coming on. It was fascinating.
Pleasure, mate.
I look forward to the next one.
Me too.
So we hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Mount Mindset. We've went all places with Ross, from fingering techniques from America all the way through to how sweet is your blood and everything in between. Why bold is not always great, because you can go from dealing drugs to being on stage, serving a greater purpose than yourself, being able to spread that good energy, because that seems to be what's missing in today's society. We have men that feel purposeless, they feel lost. Only 50 short years ago, they had 3 men to confide in. What Ross's mission seems to be is to turn the tables, to head back to that direction, to build that resilience in men. He's doing that with his retreat and his Beyond Baseline, not just for men, but for humanity, because we have this weird and wacky thing inside our heads that we can get a bit more understanding about. We've covered off all the tests that you can take to make a start in the beginning, and Ross has got some incredibly powerful things coming up in the future. So we'll look forward to seeing what they are, and I'm definitely going to be hurrying them along, because 6 months is way too long. 6 weeks is bearable, so stand by, look out for those, and we'll be sure to get them on, because we've got about 5 topics we could do an episode on each. We'll do a deep dive on them, and let us know if you want to hear about his beginnings, how he ended up nearly facing jail time to then being Mr. Showtime on stage, delivering those good speeches. We'll leave all his information in the show notes so you can hit him up and look out for the next episodes where we go into depth with what he's doing and how that can help you. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And from me, that's a wrap.